What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of The Function. I hope you guys are having a great week so far. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, like, leave some comments, and share this video with others. If you're not sure what this channel is all about, our main goal here is to make sure every man on this planet is functioning in their proper roles, making sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. So, all we're trying to do is just share content that will make you a better version of yourself and that you can take this, apply it, and just become the best man you can ever be. So today we're going to be reacting to a video about the consequences of being a victim. And what I'm just trying to get across is stop being a victim. It's really that simple. As a man, we really shouldn't be blaming people in our society. We shouldn't be whining and crying. I mean, I'm not against sharing feelings or expressing your emotions. However, we shouldn't be doing that 24/7. It's not healthy. Our main objective in life is to conquer, produce, and solve problems. That is what we do. That is in the DNA of every man. However, if we're constantly complaining, if we got bad attitudes, then we turn into a victim and then we act like we're oppressed. So, doing things like, I don't know, for example, blaming inflation, gas prices, the president, the government, women because you had a failed relationship. These are just a couple of things that men like to do instead of just looking at themselves in the mirror and saying, I should just do better. So, again, we just have to do better at not blaming ourselves because what happens when we don't blame ourselves? We have a better attitude, we move forward, and then we're solving problems. That's what we should be doing. So let me go ahead and share this video with you. It's a very powerful video and it will help bring some perspective into our lives and making sure we can, again, be the best version of ourselves. I'm going to share my screen with you. I'm going to put the video now and I'm going to stop in between to give you some perspective on what's being communicated. And this is by Jordan Peterson, a great guy, amazing man. I love watching his videos, so I wanted to share this today.
One of the things that Maya and I found when we were writing this paper, we were looking at the discourse that precedes genocide in genocidal states. And the enhancement of a sense of victimization on the part of one of the groups, usually the group that's going to commit the genocide. First of all, their sense of being victims is much heightened by the demagogues who are trying to stir up this sort of hatred. So they basically say, look, you've been oppressed in a variety of ways, and these are the people who did it, and they're not going to stop doing it, and this time we're going to get them before they get us. It's something like that. And so there's something very pathological about the enhancement of victimization, which is, well, see, that the problem as far as I'm concerned with it is it's not thought through very well. Because there's a point that's being made, and the point is that people have been oppressed and they suffer. And that's true, that point. But then the proper framework from within which to interpret that, I believe, is that that's characteristic of life. You can't take it personally in some sense. And you can't divide the world neatly into perpetrators and victims. And you certainly can't divide the world neatly into perpetrators and victims and then assume that you're only in the victim class and then assume that that gives you certain, like, access to certain forms of redress.
All right, let's stop there. I know it was a mouthful. It was a lot of good stuff. So let's just break this down. So yes, bad things do happen in life. We do have setbacks. We do experience challenges. So I'm not saying that, like I alluded to earlier, it's okay to share your feelings and your frustrations. However, we have to recognize that life happens. Life will always take place. We can't control it. We can't do anything about it. Life is going to take place whether we like it or not. It's unfortunate. I know that's not what you probably like to hear, but it's the truth. And the truth is that when you go through something, the important part is make sure you respond. Make sure you take a step forward. make sure you self-assess. So when another challenge hits you, you can go back and say, this is how I grew last time, and I'm going to take that experience into this challenge now. Because again, seasons happen. And here's the challenge though. You have to be very careful not to classify that experience to another experience. So for example, let's say it doesn't work out with a woman. If you classify every woman the same way, you're never going to experience a healthy relationship because you keep victimizing yourself from the previous experience. So it's so important to recognize what's going on, share and vent what you need to vent, and then go out and find solutions rather than constantly talking about the problem. That's key. Let's keep going.
Let's say. It gets dangerous very rapidly if you do that sort of thing. So, for example, one of the things that characterized the Soviet Union, and this was particularly true in the 1920s, but afterwards, so the Soviets were very much enamored of the idea of class guilt. So, for example, although it was only about 40 years previously that the serfs had been emancipated, they weren't much more than slaves, right? And so that was the bulk of the Russian population. They were bought and sold along with the land. So they had been emancipated, and some of them, many of them had turned into independent farmers, and some of them had become reasonably prosperous because, at least in principle, I presume a certain proportion of them from being crooked, but I presume a larger proportion from actually being able to raise food. And of course, at that time, the bulk of the Russian food population was produced by these relatively successful peasant farmers. And relatively successful would mean maybe they had a brick house or something, and maybe they had a couple of cows, and maybe they were able to hire a few people. And so, you know, it wasn't like they were massive landowners or anything. But I've talked to you a little bit about the Pareto principle and the notion that in any domain of activity, a small proportion of people end up producing most of what's in that domain of activity. The same was true in Russia with regards to these peasant farmers. Some of them were extraordinarily efficient, and they produced most of Russia's food.
All right, let's break this down. So these farmers, if you didn't catch what he said earlier, they were once slaves. So let's stop there. They were under a condition where they thought as slaves, acted as slaves, and behaved as slaves. So when they realized that, hey, we don't have to remain slaves, they changed the condition. So if you're in a situation where something isn't going right, you're at a job you hate, for example, it's up to you how to respond. You can have a bad attitude about it. You can constantly complain. You can be in a rut, or you can get out of that rut by going home, looking at your current condition, finding something that can bring value, or find a new job that treats you better, or pursue something else on the side. That way, when you go into that condition, you can fight it better. You can handle it better because of the positive energy that you bring into the to your job. So that's so important to realize. You can actually change your condition, but it all starts here. It all starts with yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror, because these slaves could have just remained slaves, but they said, no, we're going to do better than that. We're going to learn that we can be farmers, we can be successful at this, and they were actually able to help their community. So they were able to function as men, as women in their roles, and they became successful. They became, known in their society as the ones who could make food, produce food, rather than sitting on the sidelines just constantly griping and complaining about how society isn't fair to them. Something to think about. Let's keep going.
When the communists came in, they described those landholders as parasites, essentially, predicated on the Marxist idea that if someone had extracted profit from an enterprise, that they had basically stolen that profit from the people, say, that they had employed or otherwise oppressed. And so you could be a member of the kulak, K-U-L-A-K, K-U-L-A-K. You could be a member of the kulak class. And then because you were a member of that class, you were automatically guilty. And so what happened was, and you got to think this through to really understand what happened. So what happened was the intellectual communists were sent out in cadres out into these little towns to find people who would help them round up the kulaks. Now you got to think about what a small town is like, because so imagine you're in a town and there's 3 or 4 people or maybe 10 people or something like that who are a little more successful than everyone else, and a certain number of people are going to be fine with that and maybe even happy about it because they regard those people as particularly productive and, you know, as stalwart members of the community regardless of their flaws. But there's going to be some people who are not happy about it at all, that are going to be very resentful about that and jealous. And so those are going to be people whose characters, I would say, are of the less positive type. And so when the intellectuals came in and described the reason that these people should be treated as parasites and profiteers, then it was the resentful minority in those towns, and that would be the kind of guy that hangs around in the bar all the time and is completely unconscientious and fails at everything.
Wow. So as you can see here, these successful people who are helping them, their society, becoming of value, functioning in their roles, were now being blamed. The Soviet Union, the communist government, were turning the tables on them. It was an agenda. Now, let's focus on that part where you said the person at the bar. And he goes on to say how they tried so many things and they failed. Are you the type of person, when you see somebody successful, more successful than you, are you jealous? Are you bitter? Are you upset? Or are you happy for them? Does it inspire you to be better? Does it motivate you? Does it hold you accountable to level up? Because your reaction is so important. If you have a friend, a family member who's doing very well, who has a great marriage, a great career, is doing well for themselves, is making an impact in their community, are you jealous or are you happy? Because if you're jealous, what happens next is you complain, and then you become a victim. And you don't live a victorious life. You don't overcome the obstacles in front of you. You just constantly complain and nitpick everything, never try anything new. While the victor says, I'm happy for them and I want to be great. I'm inspired. I want to try things. I want to keep improving each day. I want to be a better version of myself. That's key in how you respond, because you could be the one who changes everything. You could be the one who breaks the curse in your family generation based on how you respond. That's so critical. So let me just keep going.
And then blames everyone else for it. The intellectuals came in and said, this is unfair that this happened to you. You've actually been victimized, and now it's your opportunity to go have your revenge. And so that's exactly what happened. Now, in some of the villages, sometimes the peasants would actually surround the farmsteads of these more successful people and try to defend them, but that never worked out for very long. And so then these angry mobs would go into the farmhouses and strip the place right down to nothing. And they packed these people up and sent them on trains with no food out to Siberia, where there was no place to live. And so that they were packed into houses, maybe they had a square meter each to live in, and all their children died of typhoid, and many of them froze to death. Many people died. Millions of people died as a consequence of the dekulakization, at least as a consequence of its total effect. So what happened then was that there wasn't any food produced. And so then 6 million Ukrainians starved to death in the 1920s, which is something you never hear about, right? You never hear about that. Why do you never hear about that? That's a question worth asking.
So get this. Those people who were providing value in their society got kicked out. Just forgotten about. They were hungry. They had nothing to eat. So let's break this down on a micro level. Like I said, how you respond is so important. So if you're the type of person, let's just say you have 5 friends. One of your friends is doing very well. They're starting to, their career is going well. They're starting to establish their life, and they're just doing well, and they're contributing into society. And you go to your other 3 friends and say, man, look at them. Why don't I get the same opportunities? I'm going through so much, man. Look at me. Woe is me. Those friends start joining you. They start victimizing themselves with you. They start feeling sorry for you, and you start feeling sorry for them. And that one friend who could actually help you out is now looked at as an enemy. And what happens is it causes division in the friendship. How about family? See, the danger of victimhood, when you're comparing yourself to others, you become a victim. Comparison leads to victimhood. That's why you gotta be careful of what you look at. That's why you gotta be careful of who you surround yourself with. That's why you gotta be careful of your environment and what you feed yourself each day. Because what could happen is you could hurt the people around you. You could really, really damage things if you're not careful with how you respond to people's success. If you're not careful with the people who are actually leveling up or are actually at a higher level than you. You could be a multimillionaire and be jealous of the billionaires. Why? You're still successful. Why be jealous? Keep getting better. So you have to look at it from that perspective, because if you don't, victimhood is knocking at the door, just knocking, wanting to get in so it can destroy you, because it will destroy you. Let's keep going.
You know, it was an absolute catastrophe. They used to, so these people were starving, right to the point of cannibalism, right? I mean, it was ugly as anything you could possibly imagine. If you were a mother and so you're supposed to hand all your grain into the central committee, mostly for distribution into the cities. You didn't get to keep any for yourself. And so maybe then afterwards, if you were a mother, you'd go out in the fields that had already been harvested, and you'd pick up individual grains of wheat. And if you didn't turn those in, that was death for you. So that's how far it was pushed. So, well, so that's a little story about how victimization, how the idea of victimization and perpetration can get out of hand extraordinarily rapidly. And so whenever people are beating the victim drum, you know, they'll cover that up with empathy, roughly speaking. We're speaking on behalf of the oppressed. It's like, maybe you are, but maybe you're no saint, because, you know, you're so sure that you're a saint and you're only speaking from the position of good.
Maybe you are, or maybe you're not. Maybe you look like a saint, but you're not a saint. So let's touch on that, because I'm telling you right now, you got to be careful with people. And the reason why is some people who like to complain and mope and cry, and they use empathy to make you feel sorry for them, it's a trap. So what do you do in these situations? Well, first off, it's okay to listen to a friend who is venting or a family member. That's fine. However, if they don't seek a solution, if they don't try to learn from that lesson, be very, very careful of what happens next. Because if you keep feeding into that, you're going to become just like them. We mirror each other. So you have to have boundaries. You have to be very, very cautious. If it gets to a point where you just can no longer just talk to them, follow through, cut it off, because it's not worth your time. If they don't want to respect that boundary, move on with your life, because they're going to hold you back every time. Every time you start to get a breakthrough, they come knocking at your door. And because you feel sorry for them still, you're going to hear their next complaint. And that's very dangerous, because they will take advantage of you. They will leech off of you. That's what victims do. And they disguise it as empathy. So how do men, you know, remain victims or remain oppressed? Well, it's not like obvious. You don't always realize it just by venting and complaining, because men don't, you know, we don't always share our emotions. First way is we like to escape. How do you escape these days? Well, you can be browsing on your phone. You could be busy with just keeping up with everything in sports, on the news with politics. You could be just streaming movies after work or playing a video game after work. And again, not all of these things are wrong, but are they good for you? Because if you got a problem you need to face and you're going to these sources, You're avoiding the problem. You're escaping the reality that you're in. And what happens is it starts building and building. And the person that keeps feeding into consumption becomes unhappy, depressed, and has a hard time creating. They have a hard time overcoming. They have a hard time dealing with the fear of failure. And all they do is live in that oppressed state. And then regret takes over. They become a victim. They can never really overcome that main issue in their life. So it's not always obvious. They go escape. They do things like pornography, smoke weed, drink alcohol. They use these escapes instead of dealing with the problem. They just don't get around to it. It's because it's just easier to numb the pain, and it's only temporary. It's not going away. Instead of just dealing with the pain, dealing with the issues at hand. So that's just an example of how men deal with things and how they don't elevate or go above and beyond. So think about what you're consuming every day. Think about what you're watching. Are you, sharing any uplifting things? Are you listening to uplifting things? Are you trying new things? Are you just getting out of your comfort zone? If you're not, you could be in a position where you become a victim and you might not even realize it. So I hope this encourages you. I hope this gives you some perspective on just to stop being a victim, to really watch out for it. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, make sure you share and like this content. And I will catch you on the next episode.